Hello, everyone. Hope you're doing well. I'd love to hear your thoughts after the story, so don't forget to comment and tell me where you're watching from. All right, let's go. April sat alone at a table in a quiet restaurant, grateful for the rare solitude. Her three children were with her parents, giving her a moment to breathe. Frustration and disappointment weighed heavily on her. Once again, Paul, her husband, had been called in to work over the holidays. Thanksgiving had already been a disaster, with him pulling double shifts due to the ongoing health crisis. Now, with three of his colleagues out sick, their family plans had fallen apart yet again. Always working, she thought bitterly. Never around when I need him, and then he complains when I take the kids to visit my parents. Her brooding was interrupted by a voice. Mind if I join you? She looked up to see a well-dressed man with dark hair and an easy smile. You seem like you could use some company, he said warmly. April hesitated before nodding. She hadn't realized her emotions were so obvious. The man took the seat across from her and extended a hand. Charles Marsh, he introduced himself. April Fowler, she responded automatically. His smile widened. Rough day? A few days later, April found herself at the park, waiting for Charles. He had invited her for a walk after she had vented about Paul's constant absence. He had listened, sympathized, and then casually suggested they meet up. She had initially resisted, but had eventually given in. Now she watched as he approached her with a knowing smile. Taking her hand, he brushed his lips lightly against her knuckles. Shall we? He asked. She didn't pull away. Instead, she let him slip his arm through hers as they began walking together. Over the next 2 weeks, Charles slowly became a fixture in her thoughts. Their conversations grew longer, their interactions more frequent. It had started as friendly chats, but had shifted into something more. Flirtation, compliments, an unspoken connection forming between them. One Saturday night, as she lounged on the couch, her phone lit up with a message from him. Charles, hey gorgeous, what are you up to? April, watching a movie? Charles, let me guess, he's working again? April, yeah, as usual. Charles, and you're handling everything alone. He doesn't deserve you. Are you sure he's actually at work? April, what do you mean? Charles, if it were me, I'd check. Just saying. Her stomach twisted as she read his words. A nagging thought took hold. Maybe she should call. An hour later, her phone rang. Paul's name flashed on the screen. Hey, he said, concern in his voice. You called? What's wrong? Are the kids okay? Hearing his worry made her feel guilty. When she had tried his office, he hadn't answered. Everything's fine, she said quickly. I just wanted to hear your voice, but you weren't there. He exhaled heavily. I was handling a flight issue on the platform. My phone was in my locker. They spoke briefly before hanging up, but the unease lingered. Why had it taken so long to reach him? As the days passed, doubt began to fester alongside her discontent. 3 months later, Paul dragged himself through airport traffic after another brutal series of night shifts. He was finally free, able to rest and spend time with his family. But instead of heading home to celebrate, he found himself alone. After yet another argument, April had taken the kids to her parents' house. Their life together should have been comfortable. The house was paid off, the cars fully owned. He had even set up a college fund for their children. He worked hard trying to give them security. But somehow, it was never enough. Too drained to think, he collapsed onto the bed only to wake hours later, his stomach twisting with hunger. He decided to clear his head with a long run through the woods. 2 hours later, he returned home, showered, ate, and finally sat down to go through the mail. Most of it was junk, but one envelope stood out, cream-colored with gray trim. His gut tightened as he opened it, half expecting bad news. His breath caught in his throat as he read the words inside. It was a funeral announcement, for him. In loving memory of our former husband and cherished father, Cornelius Paulus Fowler. His eyes locked onto 2 names listed on the card, April Fowler, Charles Marsh. The world tilted, his mind raced. So this was why she had been distant, nagging, withdrawing, accusing. Shock gave way to fury, but he forced himself to stay calm. He needed clarity, not blind rage. For the next few days, Paul kept his emotions in check. Instead of confronting her, he made a decision. He would return to Tai Chi, something he had given up years ago for April. He needed a way to regain focus, to steady himself before taking action. After an intense training session, he returned home, his mind still reeling. He picked up the funeral card once more, and this time the rage surfaced fully. Enough, He powered on his computer, determined to dig into this Charles Marsh. Meanwhile, miles away, April kissed Charles goodbye, unaware of what Paul had discovered. Watching from a second-floor window, June Nelson felt her stomach drop. She had suspected her daughter was walking a dangerous line, but now she had undeniable proof. Turning to her husband, Jack, she let out a heavy sigh. If this keeps up, we're going to have a divorced daughter and 3 kids growing up without their father. Jack's face darkened. You think she's really involved with someone else? June nodded grimly. I need to talk to her. You'll just make it worse if you do. Jack frowned. How much pressure should we apply? Find out who this guy is, June said. I'll dig into his background. Jack hesitated. How far are we willing to go? His expression hardened as he made up his mind. If she's cheating, she's on her own. No help from us. No money for a divorce, no lawyer fees. But if there's a way to fix this, June pursed her lips. And if she leaves Paul, Jack's voice was firm, she'll have to pay rent if she moves back here. And she'll need a job. After a pause, he added, by the way, I had them sign a prenup. If she cheats, she gets nothing. No assets, no custody. June's eyes widened in shock. You what? Jack exhaled. At first, I didn't trust Paul, but I was wrong. He's a good man. I'd hate to lose him. Back at his computer, Paul typed Charles Marsh into a search engine. Within seconds, results flooded his screen. His pulse quickened as he scrolled through Charles's public social media pages. The man had no sense of privacy. Photos of April and Charles appeared, smiling, laughing, looking like a couple. Paul clenched his jaw as he downloaded the images, capturing proof of their betrayal. April had made her choice. Whether or not she had physically crossed the line, the truth was clear. She was already gone. The following morning, Paul received a text from April. April. Spring break is here. I'm staying at my parents' place for now. Paul's reply was brief. Paul. All right, I'll grieve our marriage in silence. April barely glanced at the message before smirking and responding. April. Don't be dramatic. You'll be too busy working. Then she hesitated. His wording unsettled her. Grieve? Was he beginning to suspect something? She quickly typed, April. It's just harmless flirting. Nothing's happened yet. But if you keep pushing me away, who knows? Paul read the message, his jaw tightening. He didn't respond. Instead, he picked up his phone and dialed his company's legal team. Can you recommend a good family lawyer? At the Nelson house, Jack and June entered the kitchen, their expressions tense. April frowned. What's wrong? You both look exhausted. Jack spoke before June could. We're tired because we had to look after your kids while you were out sneaking around. April's face twisted in shock. Dad, what are you talking about? I'm not sneaking around. June sighed. I saw you yesterday. Who is he? April flushed. Charles Marsh. It's just harmless fun. Jack scoffed. You call that harmless? April's voice rose. What do you expect? My husband is never home. I think he's cheating, but I have no proof. Jack slammed his hand on the table. Paul works. He breaks his back to provide for you and the kids. And this is how you repay him? His eyes burned with anger. I handle his finances. I see his pay stubs. He's been working 60 to 80 hours a week for months. And you're betraying him? He shook his head in disbelief. You're out of your mind. June placed a hand on his arm. When your father calms down, you and I will talk. There's something you need to hear. April looked between them, sensing an unspoken exchange she couldn't quite interpret. The next morning, Paul sat in a law office waiting for his appointment. His company had ties with the firm, and an urgent meeting had been arranged. Lydia Coleman, the legal assistant, greeted him. I'm Lydia. Can we review some details before Mr. Green arrives? Paul nodded, laying out the evidence. Screenshots, messages, and the funeral card that had shattered his world. Lydia listened intently, then excused herself. Outside, she leaned against the wall, blinking back tears. His story hit too close to home. Years ago, she had been the one who betrayed her husband. The guilt still haunted her. Taking a deep breath, she composed herself and returned to the office. That evening, June sat across from April, her expression unreadable. The relationship your father and I have today wasn't easy. We had to fight through doubt and insecurity. April frowned. Why are you telling me this? June exhaled. Because what you don't know is that we were both cheaters. April's eyes widened. Not on each other, June clarified. But we each destroyed our first marriages. April stared in disbelief. I cheated because I was drawn to someone else, June admitted. When my ex-husband found out, I made excuses, but I lost him because of it. Then I met your father. He was married. I pursued him. He left his wife for me when I got pregnant. June's expression darkened. By the time I had wrecked 3 marriages, your father was broken from his divorce. It took years for us to rebuild. She leaned forward. Trust once shattered never fully recovers. Even now, we still carry the scars. April's stomach churned. The weight of her mother's confession pressed down on her. June's gaze was firm. What are you going to do? There's still time to fix your marriage. April hesitated, then admitted, I haven't slept with him. Not yet. June remained silent, her expression doubtful. April sighed. We met by chance a few months ago. I was lonely, and he paid attention to me. I thought about what it would be like. I even texted Paul saying I was staying here so I could figure things out. She looked away. But it's just been kissing, touching over my clothes. Nothing more. June nodded slowly. So? What's your plan? April bit her lip. You have 2 options, June said firmly. End your marriage or confess and fix this. If you don't, we will tell Paul ourselves. April swallowed hard, realizing the ultimatum wasn't a bluff. He deserves the truth, June added. And if this leads to a divorce, we will stand by him. April's breath hitched. I get it. You've made yourselves clear. Good. April pulled out her phone, checking their shared family calendar. An idea formed in her mind. I promised the kids a trip to the zoo, she murmured. Paul has a morning shift on Saturday. I'll go home afterward, confess, and try to make things right. The next morning, as she packed for the zoo, her children buzzed with excitement, but her own thoughts raced, preparing for the difficult conversation ahead. As they piled into the car, May spoke up. Mom, when are we going home to see Daddy? April frowned. Your dad's working, sweetheart. It's no different than usual. May hesitated. Then Thomas chimed in. Mom, we see Dad all the time. Even when he's busy, he's there. He helps with homework, makes dinner, comes to our games, but you barely talk to him. May's voice softened. We know you're mad at him, but why? April stiffened. What makes you think I'm mad? May rolled her eyes. Because we see it. You shut him out, and it's eliminating him. April felt her heart lurch. May pressed on. And for what? Because of his job or because of Mr. Marsh? April's breath caught in her throat. What? Did you know Dad has a promotion coming up? May asked sharply. April's stomach dropped. What? Of course not, May said coldly. You don't talk to him. April's mind spun. A promotion? We love Daddy, May whispered. And so does Thomas. And Lindsay. April blinked back tears. Thomas muttered to May, See? Mom's treating us the same way she treated Dad. May nodded grimly. And eventually, he just gave up. April gripped the steering wheel tightly, unable to process the weight of her children's words. At the zoo, the kids had a fantastic time, but April's mind was elsewhere. Charles's messages kept popping up on her phone, more insistent than before. Frustrated, she finally snapped and typed back, I'm with my kids. I'll get back to you when I have a moment. After that, her phone went silent. That evening, as they returned home, Paul's last message echoed in her mind. All right, I'll grieve our marriage in silence. Guilt settled deep in her chest. The doorbell rang, breaking her thoughts. With a sigh, she got up to answer it. Standing on the porch was a young man in uniform, a thick envelope in his hands, and a body camera strapped to his chest. I need to speak with Mrs. April Fowler, he said in a serious tone. April's stomach clenched. That's me. What's this about? He gestured toward her ID. I need to verify your identity first. Confused and nervous, April retrieved her driver's license and handed it over. He examined it, recorded the interaction, and then handed her the envelope. You've been served, ma'am. Have a good night. As he walked away, she heard him mutter, well deserved. Frozen in place, April tore open the envelope and unfolded a letter. April, the way you ended our marriage was heartless. I should have known something was wrong when you started spending more time at your parents' house, avoiding me, and belittling me whenever we spoke. You had already decided I wasn't worth your time. If you had been honest and told me you wanted out, we could have handled this maturely. But you chose deception instead. I am requesting paternity tests for our children. The prenuptial agreement your father insisted on will be fully enforced. I even did something I swore I'd never do. I made a Facebook account. Your lover made sure to document everything. Be sure to thank him for that. You are no longer welcome in my home. The locks have been changed. You may retrieve your belongings by coordinating with one of your parents. I want no direct contact with you. Your joke about burying our marriage was humiliating. If the children are mine, we need to discuss their future. April let out a choked cry. Jack entered the room, his expression hardened. Charles Marsh, easy to track. He's left a trail of broken marriages. And now you're just another name on that list. His voice dripped with contempt. He enjoys ruining lives, April. And you let him. Jack slammed a folder onto the table. I also found out what he makes. His salary is half of Paul's, even without Paul's hazard pay. And yet you believed him when he said Paul's income wasn't enough. April felt her stomach churn. Jack stopped short when he saw her trembling, his gaze shifting to the divorce papers in her hands. June walked in, catching sight of the documents. No, this can't be happening. Jack picked up Paul's letter and read it aloud. June's face twisted in anger. April, what have you done? She demanded, her voice shaking. I didn't do anything, April stammered. I never told Paul I wanted a divorce. I don't want a divorce. I was going to talk to him tomorrow, confess everything, and beg him to forgive me. She collapsed into a chair, pale and shaken. Then suddenly her expression shifted. Determined, she straightened. No matter what Paul wrote, I'll talk to him tomorrow. I was cruel, I know, but I never asked for a divorce, and I never joked about burying our marriage. Jack and June exchanged a knowing glance. They had known Paul for years. If he had gone to this extent, April wouldn't be able to fix things alone. We need a plan, Jack said firmly. If you go in alone, April, you won't stand a chance. Meanwhile, Paul cycled home, his thoughts clouded by the wreckage of his marriage. The legal papers had been delivered. There was no turning back now. A single tear slipped down his cheek, but he quickly wiped it away. As he neared his house, he took a path behind it, unaware of the figure waiting on his porch. After arriving, he changed into a tracksuit, intent on clearing his mind. He was about to check his mail when he noticed someone sitting outside. Opening the door, he found June shivering on the steps. Paul, she said through chattering teeth. Can I come in? I need the restroom. I'm freezing. Paul hesitated before stepping aside. Come in. After using the bathroom, she emerged looking more composed. Paul led her upstairs, drawing a warm bath for her. Can you manage? He asked. I'll try, June murmured. Call me if you need anything. I will, Paul said, already walking away. I'll find you something warm to wear. As she sank into the warm water, tension started to ease. Her mind wandered to Paul. How he had helped her inside, carried her up the stairs. Despite everything, he still had a good heart. Then a thought hit her. I have a mission to complete. Once dry, she dressed in the clothes Paul had left for her, his own, slightly oversized but comforting. She smiled faintly at the gesture. Downstairs, she found Paul in the living room, a laptop open beside several damning photos and a beige envelope. Paul's voice was steady but cold. Why didn't you wait in the car? Why sit outside and freeze? June met his eyes. Because I knew you'd shut the door in my face before I had a chance to speak. Paul exhaled. So you figured if you were inside, I'd have no choice but to listen? She nodded. That was the idea. Paul leaned back. Here's the truth. April was frustrated with my schedule. She wasn't wrong. But if she had just talked to me, if she had shown patience, she would still be married. And not just to me, but to the head of my department. No more night shifts, only one weekend shift a month. And a raise. Every time I tried to tell her, she shut me out. June stiffened. This changed everything. I have to fix this. She studied Paul, seeing the barely contained fury behind his calm demeanor. Paul, she said carefully. Those photos, was that the breaking point? Is that why you filed? Paul didn't answer. Instead, he handed her the beige envelope. As June unfolded the letter, she felt the weight of Paul's pain. Her voice dropped to a whisper. I'm so sorry. We didn't raise her this way. This is beyond disrespect. She trembled. When I get back, I'm slapping her. Another coughing fit seized her. Paul rushed forward, pressing his hand to her neck to check her temperature. You've got a fever, he said. Lie down. I'm calling a doctor. Before she could protest, he lifted her up and carried her upstairs. Paul searched for the thermometer April had insisted they buy and checked June's temperature. 104 degrees Fahrenheit, he muttered. He called the clinic, explaining her symptoms. They agreed to send a doctor right away since they were nearby. 15 minutes later, a young woman entered, introducing herself as Dr. Satapathy. Paul raised an eyebrow. She seemed around his age, maybe 39 at most. Can you step outside for a moment? I need to examine her, the doctor said. Before Paul could respond, June rasped, No, he stays. The doctor hesitated but agreed. All right, Paul, I need your help lifting her shirt to check her lungs. Paul left the room for a minute, returning with a sleeping bag to keep June warm while the doctor worked. As he helped lift her, he couldn't shake the resemblance to April, and a deep sadness hit him. I always thought I'd grow old with her. After the exam, Dr. Satapathy said, acute pneumonia. She needs more tests, but for now, I'll prescribe meds. June stiffened. No hospital, just give me the meds. Within minutes, Paul was out the door to get the prescriptions. When he returned, the doctor promised to check in again tomorrow. Paul called the Nelson house. April answered, her heart racing. Hey, Paul, you're calling late. I need Jack. Wake him up if you have to, he replied coldly. April passed the phone to Jack, who soon replied, I'll be there in 3 hours. I need to pack. He turned to April. Mom's sick with pneumonia. Paul arranged everything. I'll bring her clothes, then take care of her tomorrow when Paul works. April's eyes widened. I'm coming with you. Jack shook his head. You can't. First, the kids need you. Second, he doesn't want you in the house. April's chest tightened. But it's my home, too. Jack's voice was firm. No, it's not. It was his before we married. The prenup says we're separated once divorce papers were filed. Tears welled in April's eyes. Jack sighed. I'll help you pack. After Jack left, April sat, trying to process. Her marriage was falling apart, and she couldn't pinpoint the moment it all changed, though Charles had definitely pushed her further away from Paul. She realized her actions had already destroyed her marriage, even if she hadn't slept with Charles. But how had Paul found out? She didn't know, but she knew she had to cut ties with Charles. Before sending a message to him, she hesitated. Her parents were still at Paul's house. Maybe they could help her understand why Paul had taken this step. She'd wait. Jack arrived at Paul's house and checked on June, relieved to find she was slightly better. Afterwards, he found a card on the dining table, his breath catching as he picked it up. He called April immediately. I'm sending you a photo of what I found. I want an explanation. There was silence. Then Jack added, Your mom is stable. The doctor will check on her in the morning. April opened the photo. It was a funeral card. Now I get it. This is how Paul found out. Her fingers clenched. Charles did this. She realized how naive she'd been, allowing Charles to manipulate her. She loved Paul, always had. But now, with the card, her marriage was over. She called Jack. I had nothing to do with that card. I never agreed to it. Jack's voice was harsh. You should have known better? She listened in silence, knowing he was right. Charles finally got the call he'd been waiting for. Glad you called, he said smoothly. How are you? April's voice was icy. Not great. My parents know about us, and my mom's sick with pneumonia. Charles barely reacted. Pneumonia? How'd she get that? She was wet and cold, waiting for someone to come home. Charles smirked. Oh, perfect. I'll drive a wedge between April and her parents. But that's not why I called, April said. I need to see you. His pulse quickened. Of course. Wednesday good? No, meet me at Maggie's Grill at noon. Charles grinned. Everything's falling into place. Meanwhile, June's fever finally broke. She was weak but determined to fight the divorce. She told Paul, This is between you and April, but she hasn't tried to reach out to you, and you haven't seen the kids. Paul's face darkened. That's her choice. Jack sighed. You were working hard, but when everything fell apart, she turned to another man. Paul's voice cracked. I tried, but she cheated. I can't live with that. June winced. Paul's voice lowered. We promised to care for each other through good times and bad. Jack and June exchanged a look. They'd both been unfaithful, but now their daughter had followed suit. June tried again. April says they didn't sleep together. Paul laughed bitterly. So that makes it okay? The way she treated me these last few months? June flinched. That's not what I meant. Jack sighed. Give yourself time. Cool down and look inside yourself. Paul exhaled sharply. April will disagree. Jack replied quickly. She knows Marsh sent that card. She was terrified. She never meant to leave you. Paul scoffed. So I'm good enough to provide, but when it's about fun, she needed someone else. June bristled. Now you're being unreasonable. Paul's anger flared, but he worked to control it. Jack and June exchanged worried glances, fearing he might snap. Paul's voice cracked. For months, I couldn't do anything right. Then I find out she's with another man. And now I might lose my kids. She's probably turned them against me. Jack nodded. We'll see what she told them. Paul frowned. What do you mean? Jack stood up. Let's find out. Paul gave Jack a skeptical look, but before he could object, June jumped in. Jack, put her on speaker. I'll know if she's lying. Tell her Paul's listening. If she lies, her marriage is over. Only the truth will do. Jack nodded and called April. She answered quickly. Hey, Dad, how's Mom? June spoke first. Better. The fever's down, but I'm still weak. She paused. By the way, Paul's listening. We have some questions for you. April's heart skipped a beat, a glimmer of hope flashing inside her. Paul, I love you. I was so stupid. I'm so sorry. April's voice cracked. Paul stayed silent, but June saw the tear forming in his eye. He's still angry, but he still loves her. There's hope. Jack interrupted. What did you tell the kids about the divorce? April's voice wavered. When we were driving to the zoo, May asked when we were going home because they missed Paul. I snapped and said, what does it matter? He's never home anyway. Paul stiffened. April took a shaky breath. Then Thomas, God, Thomas, talk some sense into me. They both took your side, Paul. You know how hard it is when two teenagers gang up on you? I lost it, threatened to take them home early, and then May tore my soul out, she sniffled. She turned to Thomas and said, see, she did the same thing to Dad. Every time he wanted to talk to her, she made him give up. A sob broke through her voice. Mom, April continued, choking. After you talked to me, I knew I was wrong. But hearing May say that, that's when I realized how badly I messed up. I haven't even told them about the divorce yet, but they already know. They know I ruined it. I destroyed my marriage like a spoiled child, and now I don't know how to fix it. The silence was heavy. Finally, June spoke. April, what's your plan with the kids? Paul misses them. Paul shot her a look. What are you doing? He whispered. June smiled knowingly. I'm bringing them home where they belong. Trust me. Paul frowned, but said nothing. She turned back to the phone. Any ideas, April? The kids need their father, their school, their friends. Keeping them from him only hurts them. April hesitated. I can bring them to Paul, but they can't stay long. He works too much. June glanced at Paul. Then Paul needs a nanny, or maybe their mother, to take care of them when he's not around. Paul's jaw clenched. He hated being manipulated. June squeezed his hand, grounding him, and whispered, stay calm. After a long pause, Paul muttered, I don't like it, but I'll think about it. The call ended, and Paul turned to June, sarcasm in his voice. Ready to leave? If you feel well enough. June and Jack were caught off guard. You want us to leave now? June asked. Paul's tone was firm. Tomorrow morning, you've overstayed your welcome. I won't be blackmailed, even if my kids are the bait. A wave of regret washed over June, and tears welled up. She broke down. No, Paul, please, she sobbed. I never meant to blackmail you. I wanted you to spend time with May, Thomas, and Lindsay while April fixed things. Her sobs turned into coughing. Jack hugged her tightly, eyes pleading with Paul. Paul was shaken, surprised by her reaction. I'll think about it, he said quietly. But your pressure isn't helping, he sighed. Tomorrow's my last shift. I need to finish work before the new job. Take the keys. I'll let you know what I decide. That night, Paul couldn't sleep. At 4:30 a.m., he gave up, made coffee, and packed his lunch. His mind churned with conflicting emotions. Just as he sat down, he heard soft footsteps behind him. June appeared, looking exhausted. What are you doing up? You look terrible, Paul said. I couldn't sleep. I put too much pressure on you for something selfish. Now I realize it, June said. Paul exhaled. You made me look in the mirror, June, and I realized I have to try. Walking away without trying would be as stupid as what April did. June blinked. Paul, what do you mean? It's bad. I'm furious. But I have to try. I can't just walk away. June's breath caught. Paul held up a hand. But don't tell her. Divorce papers aren't easy to undo. When you get home, give April the keys. She can come back after the holidays. June nodded, tears falling. I need to see my kids. For now, she stays in the spare room. June hugged him tightly. She has no idea how lucky she is, she whispered. But I'll tell her. Paul gave a sad smile. Go now, or I'll be late for my shift. At Maggie's Grill, Charles walked in confidently and found April at a secluded table. She's probably worried I found out about the card, he thought smugly. He approached her, leaned in, and whispered, You're beautiful, you know? April didn't flinch. She looked at him coldly. We'll have lunch. After, we'll talk in the park. Charles narrowed his eyes. I don't like how you're talking to me. Bad luck, she replied. Now you know what my husband endured for months. They ate in silence. Charles plotted how to regain control. He wanted April. She was a challenge, and he wasn't letting her slip away. April, however, had a different plan. When June and Jack returned home, they discussed everything. June still felt guilty for pressuring Paul, but then April revealed her plan to confront Charles not as a lover, but as an opponent. She wanted to make him pay for what he did to her marriage. June and Jack didn't approve, but April was determined. Jack handed her a small recorder. If Paul finds out you met with him after he let you back, you'll need proof of what really happened. At lunch's end, April stood, grabbed her jacket, and walked out, leaving Charles to pay the bill. Charles, frustrated, paid quickly and chased after her, catching up just outside. April had a plan. Leaving without paying wasn't just a power move. It gave her time to activate the recorder. If it pissed Charles off, even better. He snapped, "What's wrong with you? You can't just walk out like that." April didn't flinch. How did I not see this before? In the park, she sat on a bench, waiting. Charles leaned in, his touch possessive. "Don't touch me." April pulled out a printout and shoved it toward him. "Explain this." Charles barely glanced at it. "Your marriage was dead for months. I forced him to accept it. I showed him who the new man is." "And who told you that?" She shot back coldly. "I never said that." Charles faltered but quickly recovered. "April, we knew this was coming." April took a breath, then said, "I needed comfort, not a broken marriage. This ends today. I'm saving my marriage, which you almost destroyed." Charles's tone turned sweetly mocking. "Oh no, you're not getting off that easy. Your marriage is hanging by a thread. You'll do exactly what I want or I'll cut it myself." April sneered. "Blackmail, is that your thing?" He smirked. "Call it whatever you want. If you want your marriage, you'll satisfy me. When I'm done, maybe I'll let you keep your family, or I'll tell Paul where you were today." April's disgust grew. Does he really think Paul won't find out? She glanced around. The bench was in view of a security camera. Charles thought her silence meant submission. He leaned closer, eyes drinking her in. April shoved him back and sprayed him with pepper spray. He howled, stumbling forward, still blinded. "You'll pay for this!" he shrieked, raising his fist. April sprayed again, this time directly in his eyes. At that moment, April drove her knee sharply into Charles's groin. He dropped to the ground, gasping in pain, before she followed up with a solid knee to his face, sending him sprawling. Charles moaned, clutching his face and groin, his eyes tearing up from the combined pain and pepper spray. April smirked, feeling the rush from the self-defense training Paul had taught her. What did he always say? She muttered to herself. Fight dirty when you're outmatched. She looked at Charles and sneered. Now we're on equal footing. Stay away, or next time you won't get up. She walked to the ice cream stand where the owner handed her a cup of tea. That was something else, she said, impressed. April smiled. Thanks. Can I get a copy of that security footage just in case he tries to twist this around? The woman nodded. It's on a flash drive. It's yours if you cover the cost. April handed over a 20. Is this enough? The woman slid $10 back. Tease on me. You might have just saved your marriage. April chuckled softly. I hope so. Shaken by the adrenaline, she pocketed the flash drive and walked home. Thursday afternoon, Paul biked home, singing to himself, Weekend, one long, great weekend and many more to come. His new job was off to a solid start. The team was relieved to have a capable manager. After a few initial adjustments, he'd gotten the department running smoothly, even offering career advice to a couple of employees. With the weekend ahead, he looked forward to seeing his kids. April would be back too, but he'd accepted that if she wanted to fix things, she'd need to take the first step. At home, he changed into casual clothes and began preparing dinner. While it cooked, he tidied the house, enjoying the routine. Then the doorbell rang. 2 uniformed police officers stood outside. Good afternoon, Mr. Paul Fowler? One asked. Yes, that's me, Paul replied warily. Is everything okay with my wife or kids? No, sir, the officer said. We're here to arrest you for felony attack on Charles Marsh. Paul blinked in disbelief. What? We need you to come to the station for questioning, the officer continued. Do I have a minute? My dinner's still cooking, Paul asked, trying to stay calm. You have 5 minutes, the officer said. Paul quickly called Jack. Jack, I'm being arrested for attacking Marsh. I need help. What? Jack's voice snapped. Where are they taking you? The station, Paul replied. I don't know which one. I'll figure something out, Jack said before hanging up. Just then, April entered the room, her face pale. That was Paul, right? What's going on? Paul's been arrested, Jack said, still processing it. April's expression turned grim. No, it was me. Jack stared. What? Marsh tried to blackmail me, then he tried to force himself on me, she explained. I fought back, using some of Paul's self-defense moves, and now he's trying to blame Paul? Jack shook his head. Can you prove it? I have the recorder you gave me and the CCTV footage from the ice cream stand. I'm going to report him for maltreatment. And Paul? Jack asked. First, Marsh, April replied firmly. I'll pack a few things and head to the station. At the police station, Paul went through the standard processing. Fingerprints, photos, DNA samples, his frustration mounting with each step. Finally, he was seated in front of a detective who eyed him like prey. So, what's your side? The detective growled. Paul, already on edge, shot back. Can I quote the Bible to you, or do I get a lawyer first? The detective scowled. One more question. Do you have an alibi? Paul chuckled, a sharp, mocking laugh. An alibi for what? You're interrogating me without a lawyer. Isn't that a violation? The detective sneered. Tell me why you attacked Charles Marsh. Paul froze. Your friend? He said, realizing the detective's mistake. The detective's face hardened. You know who you're dealing with? Paul leaned in, his voice low and controlled. Oh, I do. I just can't say it out loud. Wouldn't want to insult a police officer, right? The detective slammed his fist on the table. Take him to a cell. Hours later, Paul was led out, disoriented and exhausted. He saw Lydia and Ben, his lawyers, arguing with the sheriff. April sat nearby, looking just as frustrated. Are we done? The sheriff snapped as Ben stepped forward. Not by a long shot, Ben said, crossing his arms. First, erase Paul's arrest record. Second, this woman, he gestured at April, has proof Charles Marsh is lying. She's filing charges. And third, my clients will be filing complaints about your officers. The sheriff clenched his teeth, knowing Ben's reputation all too well. Fine, he spat. The arrest record was expunged. And by the time April drove Paul home, it was late. Before Paul got out of the car, April hesitated. I know I don't deserve this, but I didn't send that card. I didn't sleep with him. And I don't want a divorce. Paul didn't answer immediately, still processing her words. Finally, she asked, When do you want to see the kids? Paul sighed, his exhaustion evident. I can't let you drive back tonight. Stay in the spare room. The kids need both of us. Tomorrow we'll go get them together. We'll talk on the way. April felt a mix of relief and nervousness. I'd like that, she said softly. I'm exhausted, though, and hungry. I'll make something quick, Paul replied. As they ate, the conversation turned to the kids. April confessed how even May and Thomas had noticed her coldness toward Paul. If two teenagers can see how badly I treated you, it must have been really bad, she admitted. Paul nodded. It was bad. After the meal, April sighed. I'm going to bed. See you tomorrow, she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Can I have a goodnight kiss? Paul looked at her, taken aback. April, why now? For months you barely spoke to me and now you want to kiss me? I sent you divorce papers. April opened her mouth, but Paul stopped her. No, we'll talk tomorrow. I'm too tired, too emotional to do this now, he exhaled. For now, I'm having a drink. You can join me if you want. We'll talk about the kids. April nodded, looking down at her wedding ring, tears brimming. Are you drinking Dutch gin? I'll have one too. They drank in silence, April filling Paul in on how the kids had scolded her on the zoo trip. She didn't hold back. If they saw how I treated you, it must have been bad. It was bad, Paul said simply. The silence stretched on. Finally, April stood. I'm going to bed. The next morning, April found herself alone in the kitchen. She poured herself a cup of coffee, then noticed someone had already made it. Her oatmeal, prepared with soy milk, was sitting in the microwave, waiting to be heated. It was a small, simple thing, but it almost broke her. He still did this for me? An hour later, Paul came in from his run, sweaty and silent. As he walked past her, April caught sight of bruises on his torso and noticed how his body had changed. Leaner but stronger, more defined than before. A sudden heat rushed through her. It had been months. Tai Chi again? She asked, trying to sound casual. Paul glanced down at his body. I shouldn't have stopped. You look good, she admitted. You've really changed. Paul's expression darkened. You have no idea how much I've changed. The silence stretched out until he finally spoke. I'm going to shower. We can talk after. On the drive to her parents' house, Paul broke the silence. Why were you at the police station yesterday? April sighed. I'm the one who kicked Charles. I pepper sprayed him, broke his nose. I didn't want you taking the blame for something I did. Paul smirked. You broke his nose? Yeah, April grinned. And he screamed. Paul's expression shifted, more serious now. Were you going to take full responsibility for his accusations? April shook her head. No, he tried to attack me. I'm filing a complaint, and your lawyer's going to help. Everything Dad dug up on Marsh is going to make his life hell. Paul's smile was grim. Nothing better could happen to that fool. A moment passed before April spoke again, voice barely a whisper. What about us? Paul's grip tightened on the wheel, his voice flat. What do you mean? I know I treated you horribly. I was stupid, selfish. I forgot how hard you worked for us, for our family. Paul's voice was tight with emotion. If you were so unhappy, why didn't you talk to me? Did I seem unapproachable? I've spent months wondering what went wrong. April's eyes filled with tears. No, Paul, you didn't do anything wrong. Paul laughed bitterly. I worked too long, too hard. Maybe I could have pushed back against my boss more, but you knew why I did it. I was working for a better future for us, and now it cost me my marriage. No, April said quickly. Let me tell you where I went wrong. Let me explain everything. Paul glanced at her, seeing the pain in her eyes, but said nothing. She took a breath and started to speak, her voice shaking. I got frustrated with how much you worked. Those long hours, especially the evening shifts, left me alone with the kids. I was doing everything alone. Then one of my friends made a joke, called me April the Fool, doing all the housework while you worked. That's when it hit me. I started feeling like a fool. She wiped away a tear. What they didn't see was me staying up late with the kids, going to bed alone. When the pandemic hit, it only got worse. You worked all the time, even on holidays. When you told me you had to work Thanksgiving, I just snapped. I left the kids with my parents and tried to distract myself. Paul's knuckles tightened on the wheel, but he stayed silent. That's when Charles saw me. He saw how miserable I was and started talking to me. He made me doubt you, made me believe you were cheating. I know now I was stupid, but at the time, I thought I was justified. When I called you that day during the emergency on the platform, remember? I was already being manipulated. Paul nodded. Yeah, I should have known better than to leave you hanging. April looked down, barely above a whisper. Charles grabbed me once. It didn't go further, but it was close. If my mom hadn't caught us, I don't even know what would have happened. Paul's hands tightened on the wheel. April reached out, touching his sleeve gently. Paul, I swear I'll do anything to fix this. I want to be the woman you deserve. I know I've done things I'll regret forever, but I want to change. I've already started looking for a counselor, something I should have done a long time ago. Paul's surprise was clear. Who told you that? April hesitated. May and Thomas. They told me I was crazy for treating you like this and that I needed to get my head checked. And they were right. Paul exhaled, his voice steady but heavy. Okay, but now I need to know, what do you want? April blinked, surprised by his directness. Do I really need to answer that? Yes, you do. I'm not assuming anything. You treated me like garbage. You practically cheated on me, and if you hadn't been caught, you would have ended up with him. So tell me, April, what do you want, and what do you expect from me? April swallowed hard. He was right. He had every reason to be blunt with her. She took a breath. I want to be your wife forever. I want to be part of our family again. I want the man I lost when I lost myself. I want us back. The words hung in the air, but Paul's dry laugh cut through the silence. April, that's not going to happen. Her stomach dropped. I don't want a divorce. But if you think my behavior was unforgivable, if you want one, I won't fight you. But please know that the card wasn't my idea. I would never have let Charles send it. Paul's tone softened slightly. That's not what I meant. Confused, April asked, Then what did you mean? Paul let out a long breath. I've thought about this a lot. Yes, I worked too much. Yes, I neglected you, but I also gave everything to you. I crossed my own boundaries to give you what you wanted, but it still wasn't enough. He paused. I've changed. I got a promotion. I work fewer hours now, 4 days a week, with 1 day off a month. No more evenings, no more night shifts. But the man you left behind, he's gone. And I'm not going back to who I was. April blinked. You got a promotion? Yeah, Paul said, the edge in his voice clear. I tried to tell you, but you weren't listening. You found comfort in someone else instead of trusting me. I wasn't enough anymore. Her heart twisted. I was awful to you. I was stupid. Paul stayed quiet for a while before speaking again. I made a vow. For better or worse, until death do us part, I swore to love and respect you. He looked at her briefly. That's the hard part. I don't take that vow lightly. Unlike the woman I once loved with all my heart. April's eyes filled with tears. I don't want a divorce. I want to try. Paul sighed, his voice steady. If that's what you want. April had been bracing for the worst. Divorce, the prenuptial agreement leaving her with nothing. Her life unraveling because of her own mistakes. But now, suddenly, she had a chance. The shift was so unexpected she couldn't quite process it. Relief flooded her, so overwhelming that she instinctively reached for Paul's hand. The car swerved sharply. Careful! Paul barked, gripping the wheel as he regained control. The tires screeched, veering into the opposite lane before he steadied the vehicle. Fortunately, the road was empty. April let out a shaky laugh. Just like our marriage, I need my husband to get me back on track. She turned to him, eyes shining. You won't regret this, Paul. I swear. Don't assume anything. His voice was firm. I'm not going into this blind. There will be rules and you may not like them. We'll discuss them with your parents. My parents? Why? Because they're already involved. Your mom pushed hard for me to give you another chance. When I agreed to think about it, she backed me into a corner, manipulating the situation. I was furious. April exhaled, realization dawning. That's why they left early. She lowered her gaze. I'm sorry. The rest of the drive was quiet, the radio playing softly in the background. When they arrived, the front door flew open before Paul had even unbuckled. Dad! May ran toward him, calling over her shoulder. Thomas! Lindsay! Daddy's here! She threw herself into his arms. Thomas followed, nearly tackling him. Lindsay, the smallest, wrapped herself around his leg, beaming. Paul hugged them tightly, inhaling the familiar scent of his children. He had missed this more than he had allowed himself to admit. Inside, they gathered in the living room. Before Paul could say a word, Thomas blurted, Does this mean you aren't divorcing Mom? Silence. The four adults froze. What? They all exclaimed in unison. May crossed her arms. Come on, you think we're stupid? Mom ignored Dad for months, then suddenly we're living here and we have to call some guy Uncle Charles? We figured it out. A heavy tension filled the room. April swallowed hard, turning to her children. Yes, I was very stupid, she admitted. Your father and I have a lot to talk about, and I hope I can convince him that I've learned my lesson. She looked at May and Thomas. And you two were part of what made me realize that. She pulled them into a hug. Please, forgive me and help me fix this. That afternoon, with Lindsay playing at a neighbor's house and May and Thomas upstairs, the four adults sat at the dining table. Paul ran a hand through his hair. It's time to talk. April hesitated. Can I start? Paul gestured for her to go ahead. She took a deep breath. I could say I'm sorry 1,000,000 times, but it wouldn't be enough. So I'll say it once. I'm sorry. And I will do everything I can to earn back your trust. I want to be the woman I used to be before I threw everything away. Paul's expression remained unreadable. I already told you this in the car, but I'll say it again here, in front of your parents. That won't happen. Jack and June tensed. Paul's tone was firm. I won't bend over backward to meet every need you have. I did that for years, and I won't do it again. In other words, he continued, the man sitting across from you is not the same man you left behind. June hesitated. Does that mean you're leaving? No. Paul's response was immediate. I'll try to save our marriage, but April has to earn my heart back. A lot of love was burned because of what she did. There's still something left. But right now I'm doing this because I made a vow, and for the kids. April lowered her gaze. This Paul was different, direct, unyielding, firm in his boundaries. Could she make this version of him love her again? Paul exhaled. The divorce will be final in 5 months. We'll see where we stand then. If we both want to keep trying, we'll stop the process. If not, I won't fight it. You might want to get a lawyer. Jack and June exchanged stunned looks. April felt her chest tighten. He was serious. Now about logistics, Paul continued. I work 4 days a week, 6 a.m. to 4 p.m., plus 1 weekend shift a month, no overtime. I'll always be home by 5:30. Then he delivered the hardest part. For now, you'll stay in the guest room until we decide if we're a couple again. If we do. April flinched, but nodded. Paul kept going. I'm keeping the changes I made while you were gone. Tai Chi, workouts, structure. The kids are learning too. They need to know how to defend themselves. April felt a flicker of relief. At least they were staying in the same house. Paul leaned forward. I'll put in real effort. But if I see you pulling away again, we're done, no discussion. You'll go back to your parents." April bit her lip, then took a steadying breath. "Paul," she said carefully, "you are very dear to me, even if I know it's hard for you to believe that right now, but after Mom, Dad, May, and Thomas nearly tore my head off, I realized how blind I was." She held his gaze. "I promise. I'll work as hard as you do. Maybe harder. Because I have more to fix." Her voice softened. "And Paul, thank you. Thank you for giving me a chance to prove that I can be the wife I promised to be in our vows." Paul looked into her tear-filled eyes, searching for something. Whatever he found made him nod. "Okay," he said finally. "Let's start rebuilding. Call the kids, we're going home." That evening, after settling in, they sat on opposite ends of the couch. Paul stretched. "Anything you want to do with the kids this weekend?" April perked up. "Wait, you're off?" Paul smirked. "Better get used to it. I work 4 days a week now. Think about it." April hesitated, then smiled. "A picnic by the lake, maybe rent a canoe." "Sounds good." Paul nodded. "Oh, and one more thing," she added. "Let's make a deal." Paul raised a brow. "What kind of deal?" "That we never leave without saying goodbye. And when someone comes home, we always say hello. No more silent treatments, no more avoidance." Paul exhaled. "Agreed." April stepped closer. Without hesitation, she leaned in and kissed him softly. "Thank you for giving me another chance," she whispered. "I love you. Good night." Paul stood frozen as she walked upstairs. His eyes traced her for a second before he sighed and shook his head. Months later, Paul took the kids away for a Tai Chi weekend, while April stayed behind with her parents. Sitting outside an ice cream shop, she caught up with June. "Marsh got 6 years in prison and a $10,000 fine," April said. "Restraining order, too. He can never contact us again." June sighed in relief. "Good. And you and Paul?" April hesitated. "I don't know. Things are calm, but no hugs, no kisses. It's like a platonic marriage now. I don't know what to do." June frowned. "Nothing at all." April blushed. "He responds physically. Last week I hugged him and, well, let's just say I could tell. But then he patted my shoulder and walked away." June raised a brow. "And what are you going to do about that?" April exhaled. "I don't know, but I do know this. I'm not giving up on my husband." June studied April for a moment before smiling knowingly. "April, I think you're looking at this all wrong." April frowned. "What do you mean?" "You're waiting for Paul to make a move, right? To take charge again?" April lowered her gaze and whispered, "Yes." June smirked. "What if Paul sees it differently? What if in his mind you're the one who pushed him away? Maybe now it's your turn to prove that you still want him." April's eyes widened. "You really think so?" "Oh, absolutely," June grinned. "If I were you, I'd rip his damn pants off." April burst out laughing, her face burning. "Mom, I'm serious," June winked. "We're going shopping, now." April hesitated. "Shopping?" "Yes, the kids are staying with us next weekend. You and Paul will have the house to yourselves." April bit her lip, intrigued. "Okay, so what's the plan?" June leaned in, voice low. "Start slow. Monday, wake up early and have breakfast ready when he comes downstairs." April made a face. "He wakes up at 4:45 a.m. "Then so do you," June said firmly. "Tell him you want to adjust before your new job starts. Make it normal for him to see you first thing in the morning." April nodded slowly. "All right. And then?" "Friday night," June smirked. "You seduce your husband, make his favorite dinner, sushi, feed him with chopsticks. But when he takes the third bite, hold the next piece between your lips." April's eyes widened. "Oh, I like that," June grinned. "Then once you have him hooked, reel him in." April's excitement replaced her doubt. Paul doesn't stand a chance," June chuckled. April's heart pounded. "I will win my husband back." Paul was getting used to having breakfast with April every morning, and to his surprise, he liked it. But when he walked into the kitchen, his jaw nearly hit the floor. April stood there in a silky, form-fitting dress that shimmered under the light. It hugged her curves in all the right places, hinting at what lay beneath. Stockings graced her legs, and oddly enough, she wore cozy slippers, a contrast that made her even more irresistible. "You look amazing," Paul murmured. "What's the occasion?" April beamed at the compliment. "You're the occasion. Consider this a preview of what's coming this weekend. The kids will be with my parents, and I will be coming for you." Paul's brain short-circuited. Heat rushed through his body. This is happening. Yes, she whispered. I want to go back to bed with the man I love even more after everything you've done for me. After my stupidity and selfishness, I want the man I married back. But even more than that, I want the man you've become. She stepped forward and kissed him softly. His mind raced. Was this real? A setup? It had been so long since she looked at him like this. He wanted her. God, did he want her? But it wasn't just about desire. It was about trust. Before he could react, she kissed him again, quick, teasing. Then, with a playful smirk, she stepped back. I need to change before the kids wake up, she teased. Paul rode to work in a daze. His thoughts tangled, emotions all over the place. He needed to think. At work, he sent her a message. I'll be home late. Need to clear my head. Going for a run in the woods after work. See you at 10:30. April frowned at the text. Had she pushed too hard? She had told him her plans in advance, hoping to ease him into the idea rather than surprise him. But maybe even that was too much. Later, when Paul was getting ready for his run, April found him in the doorway. She wanted to tell him she loved him, to say she regretted everything. She just watched him. He looked so good. Broad shoulders, lean waist, streaks of gray at his temples that somehow made him more attractive. Tai Chi had changed him. He was leaner, stronger. She sighed in admiration, until he dropped his boxers without hesitation, changing right in front of her. April's breath hitched. God help me. He wasn't bulky, but he was all defined muscle. A body like a gymnast, not a bodybuilder. It took everything in her not to close the distance between them. No, if I push too hard, it's over. But she had to say something. God, you look good, she rasped. You're beautiful, inside and out. Paul turned, startled, then flushed. April laughed, delighted at his reaction. The tension cracked, and soon they were both laughing. Paul's run was longer than usual. He needed the clarity. Was he a better person with or without a wife? For an hour, as his feet pounded the dirt path, he let the question settle. Then, like lightning, the answer struck. He knew what he had to do. The next morning played out like the last, but with one key difference. April wore a silk robe, loosely tied at the waist, shifting with every movement. When she reached for the coffee pot, the robe parted just enough for Paul to realize she was completely without anything underneath. His breath caught. April noticed his stare and smiled, her body responding in ways she had almost forgotten. A rush of heat flooded her veins. I need a cold shower, she murmured. Otherwise, you'll be absent today without permission, and the children will see something they never wanted to witness. She kissed him, slow and deep, then hurried upstairs, leaving Paul standing there, torn between frustration and longing. At work, he forced himself to focus. He left early, unable to shake the memory of her teasing words, her scent, her touch. When he arrived home, April was waiting, tears streaming down her cheeks. She threw herself into his arms, sobbing, You bought me flowers! You made me so happy! Paul held her gently. They arrived early. She sniffled, nodding. I knew you were up to something, Paul smiled. Your parents were here this morning to pick up the kids. They'll bring them home Sunday night. April wiped her tears. Good, because I'm an emotional mess, Paul smirked. But what a beautiful mess you are. She swatted his arm. You're a fool, Paul Fowler. He raised a brow. That's Mr. Fool to you, thank you very much, she giggled, stepping back. Oh, and by the way, I ordered sushi for dinner. You're not allowed to do anything tonight, except maybe one thing by the end of the evening. That night, after a lingering dinner, they made love. The next morning, April woke up sore, but completely happy. She turned, expecting to find Paul beside her, but the bed was empty. She smirked. Of course he's up already. Slowly, she staggered into the kitchen, wrapping her arms around him from behind. Pressing herself against his back, she let her hands slide down. Paul groaned. God, woman, you're insatiable. Are you trying to eliminate me? April laughed. Oh no, if you enter me now, I'll break in half. Paul chuckled, sitting her at the table, pouring her coffee. Do you still want to move today? April smirked. No, you kept your promise. You wore me out. Paul grinned. Good. We have the whole day to ourselves. Let's make it memorable. April squeezed his hand. Yes, let's. But I was thinking, what do you think about counseling to help us reconnect? Paul studied her, then smiled. That's a great idea. April beamed. Then it settled. A year later, on April Fool's Day, she prepared a feast. May peeked into the kitchen. Mom, why are you making all of Dad's favorite food? April smiled. Because today isn't just April Fool's Day for us. May frowned. Then what is it? April kissed her daughter's forehead. It's our Fool's Day. Because if your dad is a fool for forgiving me, then I'm the luckiest woman in the world.